We like to think trust is built in the good times, when prayers are answered, when blessings are flowing, when everything seems to be going according to plan. But that's not where deep trust is formed. That's not where faith takes root. Trust is built in brokenness. Trust is built in the moments when nothing makes sense, and you choose to believe anyway. It's in the silence after the storm, when you feel like God isn't speaking, and you still say, "I'll wait on you." It's in the space between the promise and the fulfillment, when doubt creeps in, and you still decide to worship. That's where real trust is forged. Anyone can trust God when everything is going well. When the job comes through, when the relationship is strong, when the healing happens. But what about when the report comes back bad? What about when you get passed over? What about when the people you counted on turn their backs on you? That's where the decision to trust becomes powerful. It's not blind optimism. It's rooted confidence in who God is, even when you can't trace what He's doing. Brokenness does something that comfort never can. It strips away the illusion of control. It peels back the layers of self-sufficiency and pride. When you're broken, you stop trying to impress God and start needing Him. You stop trying to figure everything out and start falling on your face in surrender. And that is the place where trust grows, not because you understand everything, but because you've got nothing else to lean on but Him. In Scripture, we see over and over again how God meets people in their brokenness. David was a man after God's heart, but he was also a man deeply familiar with pain, betrayal, and failure. His psalms weren't written in palaces of comfort. They were often written in caves of confusion. And yet, through tears and trembling hands, David said things like, "I will trust in you. And though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." He didn't write that from a place of strength. He wrote that from a place of desperation. That's where trust becomes real. Abraham waited decades for the child God promised him. Decades of uncertainty, years of wondering if he had heard God wrong. And even when the promise came in the form of Isaac, God tested him again, asking him to place that very promise on the altar. What kind of trust does it take to offer back the thing you waited so long to receive? That's not comfort, that's brokenness. That's faith in its rawest form. Even Jesus, in the Garden of Gethsemane, sweat blood as he wrestled with the will of the Father. He was fully God, yes, but also fully human. And in that moment of agony, he didn't deny the pain, he acknowledged it. "If there is any other way, let this cup pass from me. But not my will, your will be done." That's trust in brokenness. That's obedience and surrender. That's what it looks like to rely on the Father, even when it costs everything. We're so conditioned to believe that brokenness is weakness. But in the kingdom of God, brokenness is the breeding ground for strength. When you're broken, you're positioned perfectly for God to pour in His grace. His power is made perfect not in your strength, but in your weakness. And when you trust Him from that place, not from the mountain, but from the valley, your faith becomes something real, something tested, something strong. Trust built in comfort is shallow. It may survive for a while, but it can't stand the pressure of life. Trust built in brokenness, though, is unshakable because it's not based on feelings. It's anchored in truth. It's not tied to outcomes. It's rooted in the character of God. That kind of trust doesn't waver with the wind. It holds firm even when the ground shakes. When life starts falling apart, our first instinct is often to question God's faithfulness. We assume that if things were truly under His control, if He truly loved us, then life would be fair. The truth is, we tie God's faithfulness to the outcome we want instead of the nature of who He is. But God doesn't need fairness to be faithful. His character isn't dependent on our circumstances. He remains true to His word, even when the world around us feels like it's falling apart. Fairness, by our standards, is a moving target. It's shaped by what we think we deserve, by how hard we've worked, or by how much we've sacrificed. We think that if we've done enough of the right things, then good things should follow. And when they don't, when suffering hits without warning, it can feel like God has failed. But His faithfulness isn't measured by the absence of pain. It's measured by His presence in the middle of it. It's not about everything going the way we hoped. It's about knowing He is still holding it all. Even when it breaks, God never promised life would be fair. He promised He would be faithful. There's a difference. Fairness is about what you think should happen. Faithfulness is about what God knows needs to happen to bring about His purpose in your life. And those two things don't always look the same. What you see as unfair, He might be using to refine your character. What you see as failure, He might be using to strengthen your faith. What feels like a delay might be His divine protection. The Bible is filled with people who walk through unfair circumstances and still witness God's faithfulness. Think about Daniel, thrown into a lion's den, not because he did something wrong, but because he did everything right. It wasn't fair, but God was faithful. The lions didn't touch him. He wasn't spared from the den, but he was sustained in it. That's faithfulness. That's the kind of God we serve. Or look at Paul, beaten, shipwrecked, imprisoned. He was doing the will of God, preaching the gospel, and still faced constant hardship. If life were about fairness, Paul should have lived a comfortable life. But instead, his life was marked by suffering, and through it all, he wrote letters from prison declaring the goodness of God, declaring joy, peace, and confidence, not because of his circumstances, but because of the one who never left him in them. That's faithfulness. It doesn't always look like deliverance. Sometimes it looks like endurance. We confuse comfort with confirmation. We assume that if things are going well, God is pleased, and if they're not, He's distant. But sometimes the very struggle you're in is the sign that God is doing a deeper work. Faithfulness doesn't mean God gives you everything you want. It means He gives you everything you need to fulfill His will. It means He sticks with you, walks with you, strengthens you, and sustains you even when life gets unfair. Even Jesus, the Son of God, endured injustice. He was falsely accused, beaten, humiliated, and crucified. There was nothing fair about it. But through that unfair suffering came the most faithful act of love the world has ever known. God didn't step back from the cross. He leaned into it. He allowed what was unfair to redeem what was broken. If God can use that kind of pain for a greater purpose, then what makes you think He can't use yours? Fairness may be the expectation of the world, but faithfulness is the promise of God. When life disappoints you, when people mistreat you, when the outcome doesn't match your obedience, you can still trust in the faithfulness of a God who sees beyond what you see. He's not bound by the limits of human fairness. His ways are higher. His timing is perfect. His purpose never fails. There's a moment in every believer's life when the circumstances seem to speak louder than the promises of God. When what you're going through feels so heavy, so relentless that your first instinct is to go silent, to pull back, to stop praying like you used to stop praising with the same passion. That's what pain does. It tries to mute your faith. It tries to convince you that because life doesn't look like the promise, then maybe the promise wasn't real. But you have to make a decision not to let your situation silence your faith. Faith isn't proven when everything feels possible. It's proven when you're surrounded by impossibility and you choose to believe anyway. When you're standing in the middle of disappointment, when nothing looks like it's working out, when all you've got left is a whisper of hope, and you still lift your hands and say, God, I trust you. That's faith. That's not denial. That's not pretending everything is okay. That's declaring that your faith isn't built on what's happening around you. It's built on who God is. The enemy knows he can't steal your salvation. But if he can silence your faith, if he can shut down your praise, if he can make you stop speaking what God spoke over your life, then he knows he can limit your impact. He knows the power of a believer who keeps declaring truth even when their world looks like it's falling apart. That's why he attacks your voice, because he knows your voice carries power, the power to shift atmospheres, the power to release peace, the power to stand firm in the middle of chaos. Look at the story of the Israelites at Jericho. God told them to march, to keep walking, to circle the walls in silence until the final day, and then shout. That shout wasn't a normal sound, it was a sound of faith. It was the sound of people who hadn't seen anything fall yet, but still believed the promise. They didn't let the silence of their surroundings shut down the sound of their belief. They kept moving. And when they shouted, the walls came down. Your breakthrough might not come because of what you feel. It might come because of what you refuse to stop declaring. David understood this. In the middle of his trials, hunted by Saul, betrayed by friends, worn down by life, he still said, I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. He didn't say that because everything was good. He said it because he chose to believe God was still good. That's what real faith looks like. It doesn't go silent when the situation gets hard. It gets louder. It digs deeper. It holds on tighter. Sometimes you have to praise through tears. Sometimes you have to worship when your voice shakes. Sometimes you have to declare healing when the report says sickness. You have to speak life when everything around you feels like death. That's not just optimism. That's warfare. That's the sound of a believer who knows that silence is not an option. Because when you stop speaking faith, you start believing fear. When you stop declaring truth, you start listening to lies. And the longer you stay quiet, the louder the doubt becomes. God's promises don't stop being true just because your situation is difficult. His word doesn't return void. But sometimes you've got to remind your own soul what God said. You've got to speak it out loud, not just for others, but for yourself. You've got to fight to keep your faith alive when everything around you feels dead, because your voice might be the very thing that keeps your spirit aligned with His purpose. Don't let what's happening to you make you forget what God has spoken over you. Don't let the pain mute your praise. Don't let the storm shut down your sound. There are seasons in life when everything feels unfair, when the pressure is unrelenting, and the disappointment seems to outweigh the progress. You pray, but the answer doesn't come. You serve, but nothing seems to shift. You believe, but the breakthrough feels delayed. In those moments, it's easy to believe the pain has no purpose. But what if the very thing that feels unfair is the thing God is using to fuel your future? What if the struggle is not a stop sign, but a starting line for something greater? God has a way of using the unexpected, the uncomfortable, and even the unfair to prepare us for the very things we've been praying for. Sometimes the fight you're in today is developing the strength you'll need tomorrow. Sometimes the rejection you faced last year is creating the room you need for the opportunities coming this year. It doesn't always make sense in the moment, but God is always intentional. He doesn't waste pain. He doesn't allow difficulty to pass through your life without also attaching it to purpose. Look at the life of Joseph. Everything about his journey seemed unfair. Sold into slavery, falsely accused, imprisoned for something he didn't do. If anyone had a reason to give up, to complain, to doubt God's plan, it was Joseph. But what looked like delay and detour was actually divine direction. Every step, no matter how painful, was leading him toward the purpose God had ordained. And when he finally stood in the palace, positioned to save nations, he was able to look back and say, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." That's what happens when you see your unfair moments as fuel for the future. Sometimes we think God only works through blessings and open doors, but some of God's greatest work happens through closed doors and painful seasons. The very thing you thought disqualified you may be the thing God uses to define you. That betrayal, it taught you discernment. That failure, It taught you resilience. That disappointment, it taught you dependence on God. Those things didn't come to destroy you. They came to deepen you, to prepare you, to position you. Pain can either push you into bitterness or push you into growth. It depends on how you respond. If you let it, what feels unfair can ignite something in you. It can wake up your faith. It can shift your priorities. It can break pride, build character, and remind you that your strength doesn't come from what you can control, but from the God who is always in control. You may not like the process, but if you stay faithful in it, God will use it. God never promised that the path would be easy, but He did promise that it would be worth it. He promised that all things, not just the good things, work together for the good of those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. That means the setback is part of the setup. That means the tears you cried are watering something bigger than you can see. And that means the season that almost broke you might be the very one that builds the foundation for what's coming next. Faith isn't just about trusting God for the miracle. It's about trusting Him in the middle of the mess. It's about believing that there's more to the story, even when the chapter you're in feels unfair. You may not understand why it's happening, but that doesn't mean it's meaningless. You may not see the purpose yet, but that doesn't mean God isn't already working behind the scenes. What feels unfair might just be the proving ground for the very thing you've been praying for. The pressure might be producing the oil. The fire might be refining the gold. The hardship might be preparing the harvest.